That's right, sensory neurons. And then they change in the spinal cord, those are the interneurons. And what were they called when they come out and go to the muscle? Motor neurons, right. So that's a reflex. And you said that you don't have to think about it, right? Well, that's what we're talking about here. It's got to be a reflex. It's got to be something that you don't think about. I want you to picture, you know, in chapter 2, there was a chart, I guess, of the human nervous system. Do you remember that? And there was the central nervous system that was made up of what? Spinal cord. Right. And then there was the peripheral nervous system, and that was broken down into the somatic nervous system, and what was the other one? Exactly, the autonomic. And then the autonomic was broken down into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it's the autonomic nervous system that we're talking about here. That's the part that trips people up. It has to be using the autonomic nervous system only in order for it to be learning through association. So if you can remember that, I think you'll do fine. If you open your book to page 156, we'll talk about learning through association. You can call it classical conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning, because Pavlov was the first person to describe that. Now, I don't really care what name you call it, you know, and it has 3 different ones. But what you have to do right now is you've got to get it in your head that, whoops. You have to get it in your head that conditioning and learning mean the exact same thing. And, you know, people have a hard time with this. Because, first of all, most people don't like the word conditioning. It sounds like training. So, like, if I say, well, I conditioned my children to come home on time, I conditioned my husband to help me with the dinner, I conditioned my students to be polite, I just sound like an evil person. Like I brainwashed you or done something bad to you. But if I use the word learning, then you're okay with that, you know? My kids learn to come home on time. But to the behaviors, it's the same thing. All learning is conditioning. So to them, conditioning is not a bad word. It just means learning. So I think if you, right now, put that in your head, you won't get mixed up with anything. So on the book, you have actually this picture here of Pavlov. And was Pavlov a psychologist? No. What was he? He was a Russian physiologist. He couldn't have cared less about learning. That was not even on his radar. So sometimes, you know, we forget that these are people who like had a real job. And they, I mean, if you think about it, this guy was interested in digestion. Okay? Now, how does digestion work? So what he would do is, he wanted to measure how much saliva a dog would have in his mouth when there was food. Because, you know, even for you, your saliva mixes with your food in your mouth when you chew it, and that's the first step in digestion. So that when you swallow your food, it's already partially digested. So the thing is, how is Pavlov going to study how much saliva a dog produces when the dog is swallowing the saliva. Well, what he figured out was he'd make a small incision in the dog's cheek, and he would put in a tube. And the tube would go through the dog's cheek and right down into the salivary gland where the saliva is produced. So that way, when he put food in the dog's mouth, the dog would start to salivate. And the saliva, instead of being swallowed, would go through the tube, and then the tube itself ended up in a beaker, a glass container. So then Pavlov could come and measure how much saliva was in the glass container because the dog wasn't swallowing it. So it was really, a pretty simple but sensible way to measure this, right? Sorry. So here's Pavlov. It's his job. He goes to work just like the rest of us do. So I'm sure he got up in the morning, brushed his teeth, washed his face, didn't shave, but, got dressed, went to his office, went to his lab, opened up the door, turned on the lights. He works with these dogs every day, so, he probably said hello to the dogs, and then he'd go over to the food cabinet and unlock the food cabinet and get out the food and start the day. Day after day. He's got a routine like we all do, right? What you're going to find is that in most of science, those really important, really big discoveries are usually done accidentally. And they're not what the person was looking for in the beginning. But a true scientist not only asks the innocent question, but a true scientist has a natural curiosity. So Pavlov one day comes in, does his little routine, says hello to the dog, starts going over to the food cabinet, and turns around and notices that saliva is already collecting in the glass. And so he kind of stops and says, well, why is the dog salivating? I didn't give him any food yet. So there's no reason for a dog to produce saliva until there's food. I mean, it's not in the dog's nature to do this. Now, we're real jaded, right? We know the answer, but Pavlov didn't. So from that point on, Pavlov turned around his entire career. And he stopped studying digestion and started studying this strange phenomenon of what makes the dog drool before he even gets the food. And that's how we got classical conditioning today. Okay? Because, he could have just blown it off. He could have said, well, it's not my problem, it's not my job. Right? Let somebody else think about that. I'm studying digestion. But no, he didn't, he thought that was a curiosity. So, what we know today is that classical conditioning, you have to pair two things close in time, and it can be an accident. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, if you look on page 157, your picture is, but same story. I just have a slightly different picture. So, somebody tell me, what was Pavlov's experiment? What did he do? Who's heard this story before? Who had psych in high school? Okay. Do you remember? What did Pavlov?
He took a toning, whatever it's called, and he played the note every time he was going to give the dog food, and then the dog would salivate because he was going to get the food, and then he would eventually play the note and not give the dog food, but it would still salivate.
You know, we're real jaded today. You know, we just hear that and we go, oh yeah, well, okay, fine. You know, the dog anticipated getting food, or the dog knew he was getting food, or the dog associated getting food, or the dog thought of getting food, or whatever. But the point is that there is no thinking involved. Producing saliva is part of the autonomic nervous system. You don't have to anticipate, you don't have to think, you don't have to know or realize anything. And you'll see that as we go through some more examples today. So, you're right though. I mean, in telling the story, you're absolutely right. But in science, not just common sense, so what Pavlov did is he brought out the food and the dog would produce saliva. Is this something you would expect? Absolutely, right? No-brainer. So he puts everything away. Okay, he writes that down. But this is something natural for the dog. Then he brings out a valve. Now what happens?
No back.
Is this surprising to you? I'm 5-year-old, right? So he puts that away, writes down the result. Now, for the first time, and every time, that he pairs the food with the valve at the same time, what does the dog do? And why is he salivating here? No? The what?
Food.
The food. The food's there. Right? There could be 25 other things here as well. He's going to salivate because there's food. Right? Everybody got that? But as he repeatedly does this, he can then take away the food and just ring the bell, and the dog will salivate. And there's no food there. So this is really like the part that people will go, how? He changed that dog's physical body. Dogs are not meant to produce saliva when they hear a bell. That's not in a dog's nature. Okay? So he altered this dog without ever touching him. I mean, without, he didn't do any brain surgery on him. He didn't give him any drugs. He didn't, give him electric shock or anything. I mean, he just paired these two things together, and now they got so closely tied that only one of these things is needed. In Pavlov's day, they were limited in what they knew about the brain and neurons and neurotransmitters. So what they would say is that the dog associated the food with the valve. And, that's common language that we use too. Except that now we know why. We know how that happened. And what we say is that neurons that wire together. And so now we have the biological reason for how this is happening. So we sort of take the mystery out of it because we understand what happens at the level of the brain. So it really, kind of a, cool thing where then maybe you're asking, well, what good is that going to do me in life? And go past some of these. It can help your life greatly. Well, we always want to make everything, something that you can use. So first of all, a couple things to remember. We already talked about the fact that it's always autonomic. Always, always, always autonomic, the response. We also talked about the fact that it has to be a reflex. talked about the fact that no thinking, no cognition is involved. Not remembering, not nothing. Can you have remembering or thinking? Of course you can, but it's not necessary. So here's some examples of autonomic responses. A person might perhaps have their heart start racing, or they may get sick to their stomach or feel nauseous, or break out in a cold sweat or get clammy, or this is an eye, so their pupils might dilate or constrict, or they might get like the creeps, they just get a creepy feeling, you know, like the hair on your arm stand up and think, ew, right? Those are things you don't have to think about. I mean, and you really can't make that happen, can you, right? You can't make yourself nauseous, or you can't make your heart go faster. So, how is this going to help people? Well, let's talk about scapegoat case. Before we do that, let's talk about taste. Did you ever have anything to eat or to drink that made you sick?
Yeah.
And then how did you feel about that food or that drink, please? Now, some people will say, oh, don't even say the word tequila. We call that learned taste aversion. Because it's something that you learn, because two things got paired up together. It has to do with taste, and aversion means that you want to stay away from it. Okay, so learned taste aversion. You learn to stay away from a particular taste. So give me an example. What are some of the things that you got sick on?
I won't eat at Steak and Shake.
You won't eat a steak shake?
I won't eat there.
You got sick once?
Every time. Like 3 times in a row.
Slow learner, eh?
My dad likes it.
Okay, and you won't go back? Don't blame them. Yes?
You know those like veggie straws? And then
Yes.
Like styrofoam? I used to like be obsessed with them, and then I ate them one time, and I don't know, it like made me sick, and I couldn't even go with them. So it's really bad. And they used to be like my favorite. I just think it made me sick that one time, and I do it every time. And that.
And you know, it probably really wasn't the veggie straws that made you sick.
Stomach bug.
That's exactly right, yeah. Yeah. But see, even knowing that, you still can't look at them. Who else?
I have 2. One was tomato soup, tequila, and then Captain Williams.
What?
Captain Williams.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, but she's like, oh. Too bad for the tomatoes.
Like chicken.
Not the
kebabs.
Captain Morgan, what?
Like chicken kebabs. I had them one night when I came home from work, and it was once I like ate late, and I ate a lot, but I woke up like I woke up in the middle of the night. And then it felt good.
Can't do
No,
it.
no.
So let's see, who has the longest standing taste aversion? So how old were you? You were probably already an adult, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Tomato
how,
soup is like 4 or 5.
okay, oh, so that kind of really stuck with you,
Yeah,
right?
only tomatoes.
Yeah, okay. Oh, and not tomatoes either.
I don't eat anything, like, I can eat like on burgers, but I won't eat anything that's like more tomato than anything else.
What about pasta sauce?
Because it has like a bunch of salt and sugar in it.
What about pasta sauce?
That I don't like a lot of, but I'll have some of it in pasta.
Do you see how specific he is? That is one of the hallmarks of learned taste aversion. You know exactly what the parameters are. I will eat this, but not that, or only under these circumstances. People are very, very clear.
When I was little, like my mom must have gave me like milk
but I don't know why she had like weird milk in the fridge. I haven't drinking milk since I was probably 2. I don't put it in my cereal. Like vanilla ice cream that I did it with milk, it grosses me out. Like I do not like milk. Yeah, like I rarely eat cereal, but I'll just eat it like I'm.
Oh, yeah, does it, I mean, it really is I mean, it sticks, it's like in there, it's like, you can't get rid of it.
When I was little, I used to go with I got babysat at this one place, and she made me sit there and drink strawberry milk till it was gone. So I wanted it so bad, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I will never drink it again.
Yeah, bad experience. So, that's a great example of classical conditioning. And now, none of you asked for that, did you? I mean, it just happened. Nobody asked for your permission. Nobody said, is it okay if we give you bad milk or tomato soup or something, right?
Well, they did ask me.
No, but I mean, to make you sick. And then, you know.
I didn't know that was happening.
Right, yeah, exactly. You didn't know that was going to happen. So, but once it does happen, that's why I say it can be accidental. So, how can we use this for good? How can we use this information to help people? Well, if you look on page 161, there's a picture there of a girl undergoing chemotherapy. And here's the problem with chemo. People undergoing chemo have to have a lot of calories. They tell you to eat a lot, okay? But unfortunately, chemo makes you sick. So, suppose you have chemo and then you go home and your family's made you a nice turkey dinner and you eat that and then you throw up. Well, it's going to be the tomato soup story all over again, right? It's going to be like, I don't want that kind. I don't want the turkey dinner or the mashed potatoes or anything else. Well, we don't want that to happen with a chemo patient. So instead, we pick a taste that we're going to give them a scapegoat. A scapegoat means something that takes the blame, right? So we pick a taste that we really don't care if they never eat it again, like maybe a certain flavor of Tic Tacs, or maybe blueberry Jell-O. So they go to chemo, we give them the flavor of Tic Tacs or mint or whatever. They get sick, but the brain blames it on the Tic Tacs or the Jell-O. They never eat Tic Tacs again, who cares? But they'll let the turkey do that. So using that scapegoat taste has been a way to help people, even when they are sick, you know, not accidentally get conditioned to not want the good things. Let them be conditioned to not want the, you know, Tic Tacs.